Hello everyone! Today we're diving into an important conversation about the impact of true crime media on society. From documentaries and podcasts to TV series, true crime has become a powerful force in both information and entertainment. But with its rise in popularity, we must ask, is it doing more harm than good? I'm your host Joss, and you're watching the Community Dialogue. To help us explore this issue, we are joined today by two professors from the CSN La Plata campus, Ms. Gibbs, who is a journalism professor, and Ms. Edelin, who is a psychology professor. Together, they will guide us through the positive and negative aspects of true crime media. Thank you both for being here today. Now let's dive into the discussion. I've got a question for the both of you. Do you think true crime media should be used to educate the public, for entertainment, or for both? We'll start with you, Professor Gibbs.
I think it can serve both purposes, and I also don't think those things are mutually exclusive. For example, most people aren't going to encounter what it's like to sit in a murder trial or to have to go to the courthouse unless they have a traffic ticket or, they're getting a marriage license. And so sometimes through shows like that, we are introduced to, albeit sometimes an unrealistic version of the social justice system or the criminal justice system, but nonetheless, you're introduced to it. So I think that it can be both entertaining as well as educational, and also introduce people to an aspect of society that they may never encounter otherwise.
I agree. It is educational and it is entertaining. And for some people, it could be that we are fascinated with true crime because we are learning. It's hard not to learn. We're learning how to be safe, how to be safer. We're learning the criminal mind in some programs. We are learning, what a victim may have gone through. So you can't help but be educated, but it also is entertaining as well. It allows for an escape from your own life sometimes. And so it does serve both purposes.
I like your take as it being kind of, your guys' takes about it being a multi-purpose kind of thing. And for you, Professor Gibbs, with true crime media gaining mainstream popularity, do you think it undermines the credibility of traditional journalism or enhances it?
Well, I think that's an excellent question because what it raises is that the information consumer is confused. And what I mean by that is you do have docuseries that we see on major streaming platforms, but that isn't necessarily traditional journalism. But it's easy as a consumer of media to get that confused, right? So a documentary produced by ABC Network, for example, is a little different than a documentary produced specifically for HBO. They may have some journalistic principles and some journalistic values that were driving the production of said program, but they aren't necessarily the same thing. They're serving two different purposes. Ideally, a docuseries, a true crime docuseries on a legacy network is there to do exactly what my colleague said, inform, educate. But something on, say, Netflix or Hulu is designed to educate somewhat, but primarily to entertain you. So we have to be really clear as the consumers of these programs what we're looking at. And it isn't always journalism. It is sometimes just infotainment.
Yeah, that demarcation is very necessary. And for you, Professor Edelin, what are some of the psychological factors that may cause people to develop heightened fascination with true crime?
I love talking about this because in my psychology courses here at the college, every class I say, listen, we are discussing behavior. Where is it coming from? What is the origin? Is it genetic, which we call nature? Is it nurture? Is it environmental? So what causes a heightened fascination? Are we predisposed genetically to be fascinated more than some other people? Have we been exposed to in our lifetime, maybe through reading books, or was it true crime? Was it playing in the background, on TV, our parents, and we've just been environmentally, we've been exposed. But some psychological factors other than that would be, we are empathetic. Most of us are empathetic. And so when we're watching true crime, we see what the victim has encountered, and we empathize with them, and we empathize with their families. Other psychological factors would include that some people have a heightened fascination with solving crimes or problem solving. And psychologists are extremely fascinated with why some people are able to solve problems with ease, and others, when they encounter a problem, it cripples them. So lots of psychological factors. We also have a need for justice, and we're watching, some of us, we have this fascination to watch to the end because we want to see the person caught. We want to see who did it, and we want to see if justice prevails and what penalty they receive.
That makes perfect sense, that kind of desire for justice. That kind of plays into our next question. Does the popularity of this media suggest that society is tackling this in a way that they want that shock value, or do they truly desire justice? I'll start with you, Professor Gibbs.
I think we see both. I think it runs the gamut. Again, we have to go back to the original purpose of the content we're consuming. If it's on a traditional newscast, news program, then the primary reason behind that is to educate or maybe even raise awareness in some regard. And that's not to say that there isn't some entertainment value in that. And then, of course, if it's on Hulu or Netflix, then there is some infotainment there. I think both coexist. I would be wrong to suggest that you'll see news programming, specifically true crime news programming, that doesn't have some kind of sensationalism or dramatization. I think at the end of the day, we're humans, and humans love good stories. We love a good story. We like mystery. We like who did it. We like conflict or controversy. We do want to see things with a happy ending or with some conclusion, whether that be justice was served or justice will be served.
And Professor Edelin, your thoughts on that?
I agree with what you said. We're living in shocking times, and what I mean by that is we want to be shocked. More so the younger generation, but we're as guilty as well. And we want to be shocked through social media. We want to be shocked on TV. We want to be shocked when we go to the movies. We're paying for that oftentimes. And so deeply rooted, we want justice. The average person wants to see justice, yes. So it is both. But I think right now in our current times that we want to be shocked more than we want to see justice.
That's an interesting take. And kind of building off of that, do you think that true crime media currently, Professor Gibbs, relies too heavily on that sensational and dramatized imagery?
I think that's an excellent question. I think that it's a storytelling technique and one that works. So think about a Disney movie that you watched, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Well, if Snow White, bites into the apple, she instantly springs up, she runs off with the prince, we probably wouldn't have stayed in the movie theater to watch it, or, we might not have gone to bed when our parents read it to us. And so we, again, like that kind of storytelling element. Can it be over the top? I think so. One thing that you definitely see in a lot of docuseries focused on real crime is reenactments. And so when you're in journalism school, you're taught when you shoot video for a news story that you should avoid reenactments, that actually can deceive the viewer. And so you do see a lot of reenactment, but again, if the purpose is sort of infotainment, then that's permissible. And then also you still need video to cover this story if there aren't a lot of images associated with the case in and of itself. I think that it's a fine line, and I think hopefully if you have producers who have journalistic standards or a code of ethics even, that can be really helpful in terms of not over dramatizing, over sensationalizing what, quite frankly, is the worst hour in someone's life.
That's so true. So you basically are saying you should strike a balance.
Absolutely.
Kind of that makes perfect sense. And Professor Edelin, regarding exposure to this graphic content, what kind of effects can viewing these true crime media have over time on someone's cognitive development?
So when we discuss cognitive development, we're looking at a person's thought process. What are they thinking about themselves? What are they thinking about their environment, their family, their culture, their society as a whole? And long-term exposure to true crime, I mean, cognitive effects, you're looking at paranoia, the feeling of being unsafe, not trusting anyone. So, thinking I can't leave the house. You become more. You may become more isolated to protect yourself. You may become more of an introvert and truly start to think that I don't have anywhere where I really can feel like something's not going to happen to me. So cognitively, we can start to again, with prolonged exposure, begin to think that the world is not a safe place. And so therefore, if we want to stay in it, we need to stay more to ourselves and not put ourselves out there.
I'll also pose that question to you, Professor Gibbs. What can viewing this media have as far as an impact on how an individual views their own safety and the safety of others in their community?
Yeah, I teach some communication theory in my comms courses, and some research suggests that people who consume copious amounts of media, for example, news programming, which sometimes veers toward crime and bad things that have happened, that the more people are consuming that type of information, they begin to think, to your point, I'm going to be a victim, excuse me, I'm going to be a victim of a crime. That's going to happen to me. It's likely this could happen to me. That state of hypervigilance, if you will, that unfortunately can develop into paranoia. And so you definitely, from a comms perspective, can see that. The other thing is people can begin to identify with lifestyles or images on media that may not be anything close to their own reality, but they begin to feel a connection to that, maybe even try to replicate that in their own lives. So there are several media effects from a communication theory standpoint that are definitely in play. I'm not suggesting that media controls us, but it definitely is a powerful influence on us.
Definitely. A lot of people believe that media exists in a vacuum and that, honestly, in the day-to-day, it's not true, correct? That makes perfect sense. Now, for you, Professor Edelin, is there a different emotional reaction to the portrayal of true crime media versus, let's say, a fictional crime story? And if so, why might these responses be different?
Well, we do react differently when we know something is not true versus something that actually happened to someone. It's inevitable. And so we can get lost in a fictional story, and we can empathize or sympathize with a victim. We may often even empathize or sympathize with a perpetrator. But again, it's not true. It's not actually happening to the people that we're seeing on the screen. So our emotional response to that is somewhat, yes, maybe for a short period of time we feel a certain way, but when we're watching something that truly happened to individuals and we're seeing and hearing what they went through, whether it's that they were kidnapped or abused or neglected or whatever the case is, our emotional response to that is much deeper. It's just greater, and it's pretty unavoidable, and that's a good thing, that we are able to watch this and know that it actually happened to someone. That response is true, and it's raw, and it's what you would expect to be. It upsets us, and we are able sometimes to say, I cannot even imagine what they went through. So yes, the emotional response is pretty different.
It's a reflection of our empathy as humans, in
Absolutely.
a sense, you could say. That makes perfect sense. And with exposure to this media, do you think there's a risk, for both of you, a risk of desensitization to violence or suffering over time?
Absolutely. I completely agree. As a journalist, I covered high-profile murder cases. And one of the biggest challenges as a journalist covering those sorts of stories, which are essentially really bad things, tragic things happening to people, is to make sure that the viewer doesn't think this person who was shot or this person who was killed in a car crash is just a statistic. It's just a number. Mm-hmm. You really want to try to add that texture and meaning, and also appeal to our compassion, the viewer's compassion empathy, as you mentioned, while raising their awareness about the reasons for this person passing. And I do think, again, this is where we go back to media being an influence. If we're repeatedly exposed to mass casualties, we're repeatedly exposed to school shootings, and you have the expertise in this area, but naturally we may become desensitized. It no longer has the same shock value. It almost becomes, I don't want to suggest normal, but it is common enough that maybe on some levels we begin to accept it as a way to process it because it is traumatic and awful and egregious. So I think that is definitely happening. And, you know, as a former journalist, I can recall really trying to make sure that a homicide victim wasn't just a data point, that I really kind of found some kind of piece of that narrative that the viewer could connect with. That could be my mother, that could be my son, that could be my coworker. And you see that sometimes in the coverage of mass casualties that we see on the news. But again, they happen so often, specifically school shootings. And then also, we are in a digital landscape. And so now we're inundated with information. We're exposed to these sorts of things all the time.
Do you have any further thoughts on that?
I just wanted to add that, you know, we're living in the current time where there's so much violence. And when I'm in class, we talk about this in my Psych 1010 courses, and I often have the younger generation. And they don't really realize how much violence they're being exposed to. And so it could be at the movies, again, video games that they're playing. It kind of becomes somewhat of a normal thing. And for someone my age, you know, I didn't grow up with video games, and I wasn't allowed to watch movies where people were being killed and things like that. So for me, I notice it a lot more, even when I'm in my kitchen and my husband and my son are watching something and I hear someone, you know, a lot of gunshots, and I pick up on that. But my youngest son is 18, and for him, it's normal. If you're not watching a movie that has some sort of violence in it, it's not as entertaining, is almost the vibe I get from him. So yes, when you're frequently exposed to true crime, you can become desensitized to it and not even realize that you are.
Mm-hmm. I almost wonder if you're sort of building this muscle by watching the entertainment piece of it, the the fictional version, and then when you're exposed to the actual real incidents, you're having that same response sometimes that you would have with the entertainment shows that you're watching. And so I do think you're right. I mean, Gen X, it's not that we didn't have crime, but it certainly wasn't as prevalent as it is today.
You did not see shows on TV that had people being decapitated.
Exactly.
I mean, I never saw that growing up. Maybe I was shielded by my parents, but I don't think there just wasn't a lot of that on television, to the best of my knowledge. And so to see it now, I still can't get used to it. I still don't like it.
Yeah.
And so I say to my students, do you think if, I give them a scenario in class and I say, if someone came into this building and they came into our classroom and they were armed, I mean, I'm wondering, would you be as shocked, as afraid, as, just upset as I would be because of everything that you've already been exposed to that even at my age, I have not.
Mm-hmm.
This conversation has been very eye-opening, but there's still a lot more to discuss. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
A moment of unawareness can lead to lasting regret. Being in a rush can make you overlook important details. 60% of the vehicles stolen were left unlocked. 50% of the vehicles had the key left inside. In Maryland, a vehicle is stolen every 22 minutes. Lock your doors. Take your keys.
This message sponsored by the Maryland State Police, the Maryland Vehicle Theft Prevention Council, and the Maryland D.C. Anti-Car Theft Committee.
Welcome back. We're still here with Professor Gibbs and Professor Edelin discussing whether true crime media is helpful or harmful. Let's jump right back in. So for you, Professor Gibbs, The Dahmer series on Netflix highlights the story of a serial killer, Jeffrey Dahmer, and his murder of 17 young men and boys. The series sheds light on his early years and the events that led to his arrest and conviction. In your opinion, does true crime media have a responsibility to represent both the perpetrator and the victim side of each story?
I think it depends. If it's produced by a traditional newsroom, then obviously they have a journalistic responsibility to present all sides. But the other thing you have to keep in mind is whether that case is pending, whether it is ongoing while that docuseries is actually being produced or is airing. That happens at times. And also whether a conviction happened. And so, in the case of someone who is convicted of a crime, I feel as though, you certainly would want to have sensitivity toward the victim, the victim's families. Whether that case was ongoing, you would want to be mindful that content produced on an ongoing case can actually influence the jury pool. And so that could actually result in a miscarriage of justice. And so those are things to be mindful of. But again, the standards in a newsroom are going to be different from an independent documentary producer who's producing something for, say, Netflix or Hulu. So hopefully, if it's produced by a traditional newsroom, they are upholding journalistic standards and principles and presenting all sides and being mindful of the status of the case.
Yeah, that's definitely something to consider because you don't want to influence with the carriage of justice. Of course, you want the best result possible for any case. Mm-hmm. And for you, Professor Edelin, why do you think some individuals develop a sense of empathy for the perpetrators of crimes, especially when the true crime media delves deeply into their personal lives?
It's really hard not to become empathetic. We don't want to justify the crime, but when a perpetrator's past, say their childhood, things that they were exposed to, the trauma they may have endured, when we're exposed to that, and we're given that information. I mean, some of the stuff that I've personally watched about the criminal, it's been, I can barely, I'm trying to imagine what that life that they had been exposed to, what it would be like. And I can't. It's that horrific in most instances. So it's extremely hard not to feel some sort of empathy when you are learning about say, for example, childhood of a serial killer, for example, and what, his parents exposed him to, and were there strangers coming in and out of the house, and was the perpetrator abused, and just when you really dive into, and some of these programs go into things that they've been exposed to overall, it's so horrifying for me, the viewer. And therefore, you do develop, most of us, some sort of empathy. And then in a lot of cases, we quickly shift that and get back to focus of, okay, but that does not excuse what they did. But becoming empathetic, I think, naturally happens for a lot of people that view true crime because they are telling you, and they're going way back to the perpetrator's very early life. So it's something that we take into account, and to try and understand what would get a person to this degree of their life where they would consider harming someone else. But once you hear everything that they were subjected to or exposed to, it's shocking. And so therefore empathy it just comes naturally.
That's very valid. So basically for you, the important thing is to understand, but to not excuse.
Yes.
In that case, makes perfect sense. And for both of you, what is, in your opinion, the healthiest way that someone can consume true crime media?
The healthiest way? Well, we're talking about information literacy, specifically media literacy, when we think about what we're consuming, how we're interpreting what we consume, and then also how we let it influence our behavior, how we show up in the world. And so I do think that the viewer has a certain level of responsibility there, but that's not to diminish the powerful influence that media has. I think first and foremost, understanding who's producing said documentary or docuseries. Again, is it a traditional news station, newsroom, or is it infotainment on Netflix or Hulu on a streaming service. And so maybe starting there and understanding who's actually producing the work. I would also encourage people, once you learn about some of these cases, maybe do a little research and read real news articles about the case. I tend to deep dive when I'm watching true crime. It's particularly when it's a case I've never heard of. I'm just curious. And so I'll go afterward and research just so I want to see, what do the real people look like? What were the real events that occurred? And that's also a good way to see whether what you were shown in a docuseries was true to the actual case, or whether there was some sensationalism. So just really being mindful of who produced it, how we're interpreting it, being curious to explore more about the subject for our own knowledge, and also, just making sure that we don't let it influence us in a way that could change how we show up in the world.
So true. And do you have any information from a psychological standpoint?
I think the healthiest way to consume true crime media is in moderation. It shouldn't be the only thing that you're watching. Although it's entertaining and it does teach us, it is educational, it can really distort if not used in moderation. The way you view, again, we talked about this earlier, the way you view our world that we live in. And I don't think that we were put here for whatever reason, whatever you believe. I don't think we were put here to be afraid to live our lives. And sometimes true crime, if not, moderated, it can make you have a distorted view of the way. Although, yes, you are exposed to true, this really happened. So you need to be educated on that, but you just don't want to live your life in fear all the time. And so in moderation.
That is so important. And starting with you, Professor Gibbs, if you could change the way that true crime is represented in media, how would you do so?
Changing the way true crime is represented in media would take a lot of different parts working together. And I almost wonder if disclaimers need to be on true crime docuseries. Disclaimers that let people know, who's producing it, and who they did try to interview, but, couldn't get a hold of or couldn't get committed to conduct an interview with. I think disclaimers could be very helpful. I also think, moderation when it comes to the reenactments, the dramatization, I think that is important. But again, if it's for infotainment purposes, you're going to see a lot of reenactments in order to stretch that from, one singular watching episode to 6 episodes, right? And so, they're trying to stretch it out so that you watch it. So, I do think disclaimers could be very helpful, though. When I think about, for example, this isn't a true crime show, but The Crown on Netflix, the royal family actually began to be concerned because viewers of The Crown saw it as historical fact and not an interpretation of history. And so they requested that Netflix begin to put a disclaimer on it. I don't believe Netflix acquiesced and did that, but it did speak to the level of influence that The Crown was having on people's understanding of the history of the royal family. And so I think you could look at true crime stories much in the same way. And so perhaps a disclaimer could be helpful.
Perfect sense. So did you have any thoughts on that?
I agree with the disclaimer. And sometimes when I'm watching, I will see this program is recommended for certain audiences. Mm-hmm. Viewer discretion is advised.
Right.
So that being in place and maybe a little bit more strict depending on the content. But also just, again, the audience has to take, the viewer has to take some responsibility. The only other thing I think that true crime, the way it's portrayed, they could maybe not sensationalize as much. I think for avid fans of true crime, we're going to watch it because it actually happened. So sometimes dramatizing things, I know you need to do that in certain situations, but I think maybe less of that is still going to have your viewers who want to know who did it and who are trying to solve this from beginning to end. So maybe less dramatizing.
That's true, to avoid cheapening the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you guys for joining us today and sharing your insights. it's clear that true crime media has a complex impact on society. And as we continue to consume these stories, it's important to think of both the potential benefits and possible harm that they may cause. We hope today's discussion has given you plenty to think about. Thank you for joining us on the Community Dialogue.